This is Tim Lipsey, System Vice President, Environmental Services for CommonSpirit Health. I would like to thank you for joining us for the Equip training series. Education and demonstration are key elements of being a professional environmental services technician. We say hello to human kindness by providing a clean, safe environment as we help save lives. It is our contribution to the healing ministry. It's the CommonSpirit way.
Our vision is to create a highly equipped and highly engaged environmental services team by using evidence-based techniques, processes, and mission metrics that ensure we provide a clean and safe environment. We help save lives. We achieve this by how we equip our people to perform, by educating our people to provide quality service, by understanding deliverables, and serving others with integrity, and always pursuing excellence. We educate our people to provide this quality service delivery by understanding deliverables and serving others with integrity while pursuing excellence. I now invite you to a special feature in the Equip video training series for CommonSpirit, a tour of the microbial jungle. As we think of keeping patients safe and all of the pathogens that are out there, it's good for us to know what it is that we're battling. So now, Dr. Paul Pearce from the Pearce Foundation of Scientific Endeavors that provides the third-party authentication and validation for the CommonSpirit program will take us on a tour of the microbial jungle.
And welcome to a tour of a patient room in a hospital. This patient room is designed for your comfort, to take care of you, to help you get well, to help you feel better quickly. And what I'd like to do today is talk about the importance of a clean, sanitary patient room. So if you'll come in, I'll point out some of the high points, offer a few tips about what's important in terms of environmental sanitation and what's important in terms of infection control and helping you get well. And what we'll do, starting out, what we'll do is just walk through the room, walk through a hospital room, look at all of the equipment, talk about some of the reservoirs for bacteria, for microorganisms that might create a problem for you, and talk about ways that can help you prevent contracting or developing a disease caused by one of those microorganisms. So again, welcome, and let's talk about some things, and if you have any questions, then just talk to the moderator, and we can get those. I can get those questions back, and I can answer those if need be. But in the hospital room, obviously the patient is lying in a hospital bed, and as you'll see here, this hospital bed has many surfaces that can become contaminated with microorganisms. For example, the bed rails can become contaminated with microorganisms all along the top surfaces. Any exposed horizontal surface can become contaminated with microorganisms. So if you think about it, if it's contaminated, then it's important that that horizontal, those environmental surfaces be disinfected, be cleaned and disinfected regularly. And as a patient, you have a right to ask, has my room been cleaned, or would you clean it for me now? And the idea being that any of these surfaces on the bed, whether it's the footboard, the headboard, bed rails, any of those areas can become contaminated. The same applies to the linens. They have to be laundered, they have to be laundered properly, and have to be replaced regularly to prevent the spread of microorganisms. If you look up behind me here, this is a patient monitoring screen, monitors all the critical patient information, blood pressure, temperature, oxygen saturation, those types of things, but it has a computer keyboard which must be cleaned regularly. And you'll notice here, this is a very good practice within your facility. If you don't have them, it's a good idea to get them. It's a silicone type cover for the keyboard so that it's much easier to disinfect, much easier to clean and disinfect. The same with this small countertop here. That has to be cleaned and disinfected. Why? It's a horizontal surface and microorganisms will settle out onto these horizontal surfaces. The same with the top of the screen, computer screen here. These can become dusty. The white glove test, you're probably familiar with that. If you run your hand across the top of a screen and you see dust, then, which I don't here actually, if you see dust, then you know that there are microorganisms there. And those microorganisms can become airborne and settle on you, the patient. So it's very important that when the room is clean, that all the surfaces, especially the horizontal surfaces, and that's those surfaces that are horizontal to the floor. This bedside table, for example, is a horizontal surface. It can become easily contaminated with body fluids, with food, with skin organisms, with visitor skin organisms. All of those can become contaminants for you, and so it's important that these surfaces be routinely cleaned and disinfected. And you notice all of the switches, all the plugs on the wall behind the bed at the head of the hospital bed, all of those need to be cleaned and disinfected regularly. The painting on the wall, we'll think, obvious question is, well, how's that painting going to become contaminated? Well, over time, if the horizontal surfaces are not disinfected routinely, then they will collect dust and become a source or a site for dissemination of microorganisms. So it's a matter of cleaning, disinfecting every surface that might be a source of microorganisms. This includes the linens, this includes all the equipment, this includes the pump, the IV pump over here that you see to my left, that has to be cleaned. The bedside cabinet that you put your personal items in, that has to be cleaned inside the drawers and outside the drawers. And the reason for that is if somebody, the patient before you, put all of their contaminated material in there and it's not clean, then all those microorganisms were left behind in that cabinet. So it's important that the drawers be clean. With that, you say, well, the question gets asked all the time, well, the drawer's closed all the time. If someone put something in there, put their purse in there, or put jewelry, or put a piece of clothing in those drawers, the potential for contamination is there. I can't emphasize, kind of going back to this bedside table, I have seen so many bedside tables, they become the desk for the patient many times. And the patient, they want to do a little work, a little bookkeeping, and they just want to keep up with things, make phone calls and what have you, and they'll lay out everything that's in their purse or everything that's in their pocket on top of this bedside table. That becomes a source for contaminating organisms. So it's important that this be cleaned and disinfected periodically. And you say, well, what about the feet on this bedside table? What about the base? Is that important? How many of you think that's important? Is the base important? Well, yes, it is. And the reason that's important is it's a horizontal surface and it's close to the floor. Where is dust, particulate matter, going to accumulate in a room that's not properly cleaned? It's going to accumulate on the lower parts or lower surfaces lower horizontal surfaces. So it's important that that be wiped, disinfected, cleaned, and disinfected periodically. And of course, every hospital, every healthcare facility has their what we call SOPs, or standard operating procedures, for the cleaning and disinfecting of a hospital room. And the EVS, or environmental services personnel, are very conscious of what needs to be done. But it's okay to ask if you have a question about how things are done and if it's been done according to their standard operating procedure. A lot of people are hesitant to do that because they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Well, you're the patient and you need to get well as quickly as you can, so it's important that you know and that you have confidence in the way that your room is being taken care of. You'll notice here behind me the sharps container. That ought to give you a hint now. Sharps container, what do you think's in this thing? Sharps. What's a sharp? A sharp is a needle. It could be a scalpel blade. It could be a scalpel. It could be anything. It could be broken glass. It could be an ampule, a glass ampule that broke, and that could have been dropped in this sharps container. Well, this has a potential to be contaminated with many different types of microorganisms. And so it's important that this sharps container be changed out and discarded. These are never reused. These are disposable. The inside part of this red container is disposable. Now this outside jacket is a security jacket, so it's opened with a key, and this sharps container is removed, cap put on, then removed, and then it's discarded in the biohazard waste. And when I talk about biohazard, I'm talking about hazards that are related to biological organisms. It's everything from MRSA, you've seen that in the news, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, streptococcus, gram-negative bacteria like E. coli, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella. Those types of organisms are frequently found in a healthcare setting, but they're all pathogenic, and especially pathogenic or disease-causing for patients who are at risk, patients who may have diabetes, for example, or they have autoimmune disease, or they have conditions where they just don't heal as well as they might have otherwise healed. So those types of microorganisms can be found in a sharps container. They can be found on any surface that's not properly disinfected, cleaned, and disinfected. So if we move over here to the furniture, I'll ask you that question again. What about this couch? Why would you think it might be contaminated? I think, well, it's just a couch. Everybody just sits on it. So does that present a risk for transmitting organisms to the patient that is in the bed? What do you think? It is. This is a risk because many times patient friends and family will lay down on this couch, take a nap, spend the night with the patient, but in that process they are shedding, the guest, family member, is shedding organisms that are on their body. Now if that person has a wound infection, a skin infection of some sort, those organisms have a chance, high probability, of contaminating this surface. So it's even more important that surfaces like this be sanitized, be decontaminated, be cleaned and sanitized. Just to kind of double down on things like these couches, if this were a pull-out couch, or this were a couch that had moving parts, those moving parts become reservoirs for microorganisms, and they're going to settle on these horizontal surfaces again. The seat of this couch is a horizontal surface. The top of this couch, top of the back of this couch, is a horizontal surface. You may not be able to see it in the video here, but I can tell you that this surface is not smooth and slick. It is kind of rough, kind of porous, and that presents a home for microorganisms that get shed into the environment. So those microorganisms that may come up in a plume from the patient or from the guest will settle on this surface, and it takes double effort to clean these types of surfaces because those microorganisms will fall in these little pits that are a natural part of this particular fabric, this plasticized fabric. So those are the things too that we need to be conscious of. And I know that the environmental services personnel are very conscious of this as they come in to clean and disinfect. There are just so many nooks and crannies that can become reservoirs, that can become harbors for microorganisms. Let's take a look at these chairs over here. This is for patient families' comfort, but what's this? This is a reclining chair. Think of all the mechanisms inside the recliner part that could be contaminated with microorganisms. And any time that this chair moves, some of those organisms are going to will become airborne. And so we have to be careful about cleaning this thoroughly. The other thing I'd like to bring to your attention on this is kind of one of my, I have a special interest in Staphylococcus. Just done a lot of work with it over the years and very familiar with its pathogenicity, its ability to cause disease. But I want to show you something. Look at the kick-out part of these recliners. You see right here and right here, back here, right there, right there. Anybody care to guess where that came from? That's from people sitting in those chairs, doing what they're designed to do, what those chairs are designed to do. That's to make the guests more comfortable. But anytime, what I'll call the footboard, anytime it gets kicked out, opened up, then organisms can come loose and become part of the airborne contaminants that are in the room. The other thing is, if you have guests that come in to see you, family members, let's just take a theoretical, hypothetical situation here. Well, it's not so hypothetical because I've seen it a lot of times, is that people come in wearing shorts, no socks, sandals, and they will have on a sleeveless shirt. They sit in these chairs, kick back in the chair, and as they kick back, all the organisms, or many of the organisms that are on their skin, end up on this chair. And not only the footboard, the kick-out board, but also the back, where you have the back of your arms, your neck, those things that can shed microorganisms will end up on this chair. So it's just so important to understand that every surface has the potential for being a harbor for microorganisms that can be problematic for personnel. In this cabinet behind over here, let me show you this just kind of to make a point. Oh, look, what do we have here? We have horizontal surfaces. Say, well, they're behind closed doors. Well, what happens when you open and close a door? Organisms that are in the air get pushed into the inside of the cabinet, and they settle out on those horizontal surfaces. Same thing with this top unit. Clean the horizontal surfaces. These types of room components, things like air conditioning chases or electrical chases, This is a soiled waste container. Again, horizontal surfaces. This is where soil linens typically go. They can be contaminated, and it's important that all those linens be handled properly. Now you may think that, well, this guy's beating the horse to death talking about all these surfaces, but the fact is that the microorganisms most closely related to things like pneumonia, wounds, wound infections, eye infections, skin infections, those types of organisms like MRSA, like E. coli, like Klebsiella, like Pseudomonas, all of those organisms can come from these surfaces we just talked about. We say, how can that be? Well, they can be left behind by somebody that brought them in with them, a friend or family member, or they can come from you as a patient. If you have a wound infection, then it's possible for those wound organisms to shed into the environment. So cleaning the room, disinfecting the room is just absolutely paramount, absolutely critical to helping reduce the incidence of infection. Now then, moving on to things related to water in the room. For example, hospital rooms have a sink and running water. Water is drinking water, water that's used for bathing, for brushing your teeth, for washing your face. That water is city water, and it's tested regularly by municipal authorities, health department, environmental services department within the city, to determine the presence of certain types of microorganisms. But as it turns out, there's a type of organism that happens to live or happens to love the conditions in plumbing systems that serve tall buildings, particularly where the water can maintain some degree of warmth. And that particular type of microorganism can be problematic because it can lead to pneumonias, and it can be transmitted. And this is the reason when you first come into your hospital, just side note here, when you first come into your hospital room, turn on the faucets. For that reason. The plumbing has to be flushed, because if there's any microorganisms, so when you turn on the water, you're flushing the pipes that might hold Legionella. You've seen Legionella in the news, and it resides primarily in plumbing systems in large buildings. You think, well, once I get the water cleared, it'll be okay. Well, look at all the splatter. All of that could be contaminated with Legionella. The classic. Something of note is that if you check into a hospital or if you check into a hotel, on one of the upper floors, always do that, because that water could have been stagnating in that line, that water line, for days, and that's where the organism Legionella likes to grow. But again, and this is where, well, you can see all this water that came splashing out of the plumbing system now becomes a haven for microorganisms that might be in the air that settle here, and the patient sits over here to put their makeup on, or to brush their teeth, or personal hygiene items, and this water itself could be contaminated with not only Legionella, but with the organisms that were on this surface. Microorganisms love water. You have to reduce the amount of water to help control, that's available to a microorganism, to help control those bugs, those microorganisms. This stuffed creature represents the HIV virus. HIV virus, human immunodeficiency virus. It's pretty well under control now, but it's still a threat. And it's a blood-borne pathogen primarily, blood and body fluids. And usually, being blood-borne, it's associated with contaminated sharps, contaminated syringes, contaminated needles. But the idea is to keep this virus out of here. You know, remember a minute ago we talked about the sharps container. Anything to do with blood collection, all that used equipment needs to go in the sharps container. So if you see something laying out, bring it to the attention of your nurse. Bring it to the attention of someone that's been assigned to take care of you. I want you to notice something here. This curtain, think, well, that's a privacy curtain. That's all it does. Well, in fact, I've had these gloves on since I walked into this room. The fact is that if I grab the curtain here, and try to pull it around, there we go. This area that I just touched, I have transferred any organism that was on this hand to this drape, to this curtain. So that means that these curtains have to be on a cleaning program, regimen, so that the organisms that might have landed here, especially where healthcare professionals touch, make sure that they've been cleaned properly to eliminate those microbes. And again, this becomes a harbor for things like MRSA and Streptococcus skin type pathogens. All right, let's look in the bathroom of a patient care area. First off, this creature represents Clostridioides difficile. It's a gram-positive spore-forming bacterium, and it's very, very difficult to kill. It's very difficult to treat, and many patients have C. diff because they've been on antibiotics and because they're predisposed to being infected with this Clostridioides difficile, or C. diff. So the goal is to clean the room, to clean the bathroom, with the intent of getting this hard to kill microorganism, bacteria, out of the facility, out of the bathroom. The other microorganism, which is a virus, Clostridioides or C. diff is a bacterium. Norovirus is a virus. Now, you probably heard of norovirus as it relates to cruise ships, but this can very easily contaminate environmental surfaces, and it's a very uncomfortable microorganism to have, or virus to have. It causes severe diarrhea, dehydration, and so it's important. And it appears in the stool most of the time, in the feces. So it's important that this be eliminated through a cleaning and disinfection process. So we have norovirus and C. diff. Norovirus and C. diff. Now, we all know that when we have a bowel movement, that the feces, that the stool sample has a large number of bacteria in it, large number of viruses in it. But the really hard ones to get rid of are the C. diff and the norovirus. That's the reason toilet seats, under the toilet seats, have to be very carefully cleaned, sanitized to get rid of, to destroy these organisms, these contaminated organisms. Now, the same thing applies to the shower here, in that this shower can become a reservoir for C. diff and norovirus, because if someone has severe diarrhea and they come in to take a shower and they have an accident, and this chair becomes highly contaminated with C. diff and norovirus. So that means not only does the top have to be, the top of the chair, top of the seat have to be disinfected, but the back of the chair, the bottom of the chair, the legs of the chair, all have to be thoroughly disinfected. And if you look over, if you're taking a shower and you like to sit down, you can sit on that little bench, or if you want to prop your leg up on that bench, you can do that. So that's what that additional part of the shower is. It's a place to give you some support if needed. But that too, it stays wet much of the time. That too has to be carefully disinfected. You know, it's a good thing to remember that microorganisms, you know, we think of small as, like a tomato seed or mustard seed. Well, a bacteria is, 3 micron, which is 3 1/millionths of a meter, of a yard. They are minuscule. In fact, you can't see them without a microscope. So they're 3 micro long and 1 micron thick or wide. So we're on a hunt here for things we can't even see. We just know that they're there because they came from humans. You know, the human body is home to trillions. How many is that? 12 zeros? It's a lot of organisms on our body, and we're shedding them all the time. One of the characters in the Charlie Brown comic strip, this little boy was running around. He had this plume of dust always around him. He looked dirty. He just had this dust around him. Well, that dust was loaded with bacteria, and this young fellow was absorbing or taking on all of those microorganisms. Now we also have a sink here. The same thing applies to this sink as applied to the one we just looked at. The thing about this one though is that when the patient has used the restroom, you know, just like our mothers taught us that you have to wash your hands after you've been to the bathroom. Well, these people who have these severe conditions like norovirus or C. diff, their hands are contaminated with those organisms. So they have to be doubly careful to wash their hands properly. And washing your hand properly is not just a licking a promise. That's one of the important things. After you've used the bathroom, one of the important things, of course, is to wash your hands. Use soap and warm water and scrub your hands or at least sing happy birthday through twice. And then rinse your hands carefully with warm water. And then as you dry your hands, use as many paper towels as needed to completely dry your hands. And it doesn't count, well, I was going to say it just doesn't count if you just use one paper towel and you dry your hands on your clothes for the last pass of drying, but dry your hands, use paper towels until your hands are dry, and then discard the paper towels into a waste. It's just so important to do that. And why is that? It's like I said a while ago, water, microbes love water. And if you have water left on your hands with wet hands, and you touch yourself, you touch your arms, your head, you scratch your back, whatever it is, you've just loaded up your hands with more organisms that hopefully you just washed off. So it's just important to dry them completely. Dry your hands completely. So here we are. Make just a couple of comments on some of the sanitary supplies that are made available now in most hospital rooms. We have a hand sanitizing compound, gel, which I encourage you to use the hand sanitizer whenever they're available, because you don't want to transfer any organisms that you have to anybody else or to anything else that that's being used to take care of yourself, like the bed or like the chairs. And then there are these disinfectant cloths which have been which are wet with a disinfectant. And so if there's a spill of some time, first call your nurse, call your healthcare professional just to let them know if there's a biological spill, but then use this to wipe it up with. There's many different brands out here. It's where they're talking about the disinfectant on the wall or talking about these disposable wipes. There are a lot of disinfectants, but really read the label, know what you're buying. These disposable disinfectant cloths are available. They're hung on the wall. They're ready for small spill cleanup, particularly biological material cleanup. You bled on something, or you have any kind of biological fluid, if you got a pneumonia, sputum, and those types of things might get on some of the equipment here. And these are good first line. These disposable wipes are good first lines of defense against the spread of organisms or bacteria that might be in that biological material. You will also see that environmental services personnel will use a product. It might be blue, might be orange, but they'll use a product that is not disposable. And it's a ultrafine microfiber healthcare grade fabric or material, textile, that is reusable and is routinely washed and disinfected after its use. The advantage of those is it helps keep your hospital bill down, and the other is that it carries, or it's able to carry, more disinfectant than these disposable wipes. I've talked about a lot of different things over these last few minutes, but in fact what we're talking about, or what we're dealing with day by day, especially in this hospital environment, is what I call the microbial jungle. The microbial jungle is represented by primarily 4 different types of organisms. We have bacteria, we have yeast, we have fungi, we have mold, and we have viruses. So we have bacteria, yeast, fungi, and viruses. Examples are bacteria. We have E. coli, we have MRSA, we have Pseudomonas, Klebsiella. In terms of yeast, we have things like Candida albicans. You've seen in the news lately, Candida auris. Fungi can be Trichophyton interdigitale. It can be athlete's foot type fungus. And then viruses can be HIV, can be coronavirus, can be norovirus, can be monkeypox virus. And that, all of those 4 categories of organisms, there are representative microbes that make up those 4 categories. And that brings us to the point that there are more than 1,000 known pathogens or emerging pathogens that we deal with in healthcare every single day. Yeah, they're the big 8, big 10 type of organisms we're most familiar with, but we have to understand that microorganisms are changing to meet the conditions in which they live. They're sharing genetic material, genetic information, they're developing multi-drug resistance, all of these types of things. So it becomes imperative that you, me as a healthcare professional, take special interest in managing, controlling that microbial jungle. it's not just them, it's us. And we are the ones that have to step up and recognize that we're not just, well, it's a multi-pronged approach. That's the reason the use of validated, verified, registered disinfectants that have minimal residual, that are very lethal to the microbes, that are green, that are create no harm for the patient. That's the reason we have to look at those all the time to find something that will take care of that microbial jungle and prevent infection. So I wish you good luck in this journey of microbial control, but just know that it has been around for thousands of years, and we'll get better at controlling it and preventing disease. But the microorganisms, they'll change some, but they're not going to go away. So it's our job to be very diligent about how we manage and control those organisms as they attempt to enter our healthcare facility, but then how we control them if they do get loose in the facility itself. So I hope this has helped. Just wish you all the best and good luck and best wishes in all your future endeavors, and we're always available to help. Always available to help.